Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria was in dire need of a new security guard. The role of a security guard was fairly essential, since every business needed one in order to enforce and guarantee the safety needed. From the complaints of the lack of safety that spread through the pizzeria from the adults as it is, it was fairly essential that they needed at least something to stick by to prevent any robberies, murders, or anything else of that kind. Many people wouldn't understand why a robbery or anything of the sort would take place, since one glance at an animatronic would creep out someone as it is. But it wasn't robberies the pizzeria was concerned about. It was the animatronics themselves. Many would think that the owner of the restaurant was concerned of the children's well-being around the robots. But the owner was actually concerned of the state of the animatronics rather than the children's. The owner was actually pretty greedy, and Freddy's band combined with Pirate Cove just had the money racking in by the second. And to have any of the animatronics permanently damaged and not being able to be replaced or to have ran off was something they could not afford. Ads were ran everywhere for the position. The old security guard had quit their job, claiming that they were too uncomfortable in their position of the pizzeria. No one could blame him, honestly. Who would want to work at a pizzeria where the animatronics were allowed to wander around and invade your privacy, nevertheless drive you mad if you had a fear of them? Little did they all know that the lad was lucky to leave just in time. He had left on the 8th of June, 1987. Only 2 months after that was when the infamous Bite of 87 took place. It was the 5th of August when the Bite of 87 happened. It was just any normal day. The pizzeria was filled with children that piled in to watch the animatronic band play, as others ran into Pirate Cove to hear the pirate narrate some of his old adventures and have new ones with his audience as he sang a song just for the occasion. Well, to say that the new ones went into Pirate Cove were unlucky was an understatement. They were unknowingly risking their lives entering that certain space in that exact pizzeria at that exact specific time. Both the children and adults were oblivious of Foxy's state that day. He had broken down about 4 times that morning, and he wasn't holding up so well. If you went to Pirate Cove every day, you'd recognize that he moved a bit slower than normal, and his voice had a certain delay to it. Nevertheless, how he responded slower than normal. This included his storage for analyzing and processing, which would heavily decrease on his social and other essential programs. The children sat down as they looked up at the fox with exciting smiles. Newcomers observed their surroundings and the animatronic, feeling a bit uncertain, just like how everyone else did on day 1. Foxy walked a bit on stage, taking a good look at his audience. His movements creaked more than usual, and he ended up staring at the children longer than he normally did. After a few seconds, his metallic jaw loudly creaked as he asked, "Ahoy there, mateys. How are you all doing today?" The children were oblivious to the creak as they responded, "Great!" Foxy blinked and stood for a minute or two, which had gotten the children a bit worried. He then moved with a slight creak as he then stood in the middle of the stage, looking around once more. He did his normal introduction, but his voice had lost volume in the middle of the sentence, and the children could not hear. It didn't matter anyway, because he had gone down to doing his daily routine immediately after he introduced himself. "Good day, mateys. Ye be comin' to Pirate's Cove just at the right time, ye be. Ye also caught old Foxy in a good mood. Early this mornin', I was just reminiscin' of me ye old swashbucklin' days. Care to hear about 'em?" The children cheered in response. Foxy walked over to the edge of the stage, and his movements resulted in loud creaks. Loud enough that the children covered their ears as they scooted back a bit from the stage. When Foxy reached the end, he froze. The children removed their hands as they looked up at the fox pirate, both curious and worried. A groaning sound came out from the robot as Foxy's legs slowly retracted. They then saw the animatronic lean a bit off stage, and they scooted closer, thinking that the pirate had a secret to tell them. None of them noticed how far the fox had been leaning off the stage, and he ended up falling off of it. This wouldn't have been such a big deal if it weren't for the child Foxy landed on. Since Foxy had been leaning forward, his head had crashed onto the child, and it wasn't exactly his head that caused injury to the child, but of Foxy's sharp teeth. The child let out a painful scream as Foxy's teeth cut through the boy's skull. Because of how heavy Foxy was and their size differences, Foxy ended up sinking his teeth deep enough to cut off the boy's frontal lobe. Many other high-pitched screams came out from the scene, and immediately, Freddy's band's music ceased as everyone turned to Pirate's Cove. Adults screamed as well, and children ran from Foxy and the child. Blood was dripping off from the boy's head, and Foxy's metal jawline as it slowly landed on the carpet below them. The boy's mother ran to the scene immediately, and had started screaming as she tried to push the paralyzed animatronic off her son. Adults ran to the scene and helped the mother. Foxy ended up being pushed off from some brawny stranger and had hit the front of the stage, which had, coincidentally, some pointy decorations of a pirate ship. Foxy's torso had gotten cut from this, and he remained on the edge of the decorated ship's bowsprit's point. His eyes were barely lit as the bot twitched. It looked like a horror scene, with blood dripping down from the animatronic's mouth and onto the floor. Many children and adults stared at the scene, fear placed onto their faces as their jaws hung open. Many of the children cried, clinging onto their parents. The child that had their frontal lobe bitten off practically fainted by then, and the mother was on the phone, panicking as she called for an emergency. Since there was no security guard to watch over the cameras, none of the employees were notified of this until a child ran to one of the waiters and told them. Immediately, everyone on shift then ran to Pirate's Cove and had grabbed Foxy and brought him out of the room and to the far end of the restaurant, trying to calm down the customers. Freddy and his band stood on stage, watching as everyone ran and panicked. All the children were running around screaming, and the animatronics blinked as they looked at each other, stepping off stage and approaching Pirate's Cove, where all the commotion was going on. No one noticed the animatronic's presence, too busy trying to take in what had happened. Freddy turned his head with a slight click as he observed the child carried in his mother's arms. She was trying to make her way out the front door, brushing past the crowd that surrounded her. The animatronic then glanced back at Pirate's Cove to see Foxy missing. The animatronics glanced at each other, signals picking up to assume what had happened. "Oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man," the owner muttered under his breath as he stared at the paper clutched in his hand, elbows resting the other 2 sacks placed on his desk. The mechanic glanced at him as she continued to wipe the blood off of Foxy's jaw. She rolled her eyes as she looked back at the deactivated animatronic. "They're going to sue. How did I know?" The owner leaned back in his seat, groaning as he rubbed his forehead in frustration. "You should have known the moment you let Foxy out to run his show," the mechanic commented as she threw the tissue to the side. "I warned you not to do so. He broke down 4 times this morning. He needed more repairs done before he was let out." "Hey, there was a big line in front of Pirate Cove today. What was I supposed to tell them? That Foxy was not working for a few hours? They would have left by then." The owner threw his hands in the air. The mechanic sighed. "Look, if you cared about Foxy, then you should have known he wasn't working well. You knew something would have happened like this, sending him out first thing after we said we covered all the main problems with him. I thought you meant that you were done. Besides, he looked perfectly fine when you released him. It doesn't mean he wouldn't encounter more errors. This one could have killed the kid. We're lucky he didn't die." The mechanic turned to give him a look. "And this only proves that Foxy is capable of killing a child. We simply can't have him walking around anymore if this occurs again." He fell off stage. He wasn't walking and bit the kid's head off. He encountered an error where he was unable to give his wire signals to move, and his metal body was basically paralyzed. His whole body shut off for a complete minute, which made him fall in the first place. Still, the parents aren't pleased with this at all. Pirates Cove won't make any more money with this story shoved in every paper released this week," the owner muttered under his breath. "Looks like I have no choice but to put Foxy out of order. It's the only way they'll buy it." "Buy what?" "That wasn't your fault." The mechanic gave him a look. "Yes, and it wasn't mine to begin with. Foxy was the one that broke down, not me." The owner leaned on his seat. "Sir, you were the one that released Foxy, already knowing his condition from this morning. And if a lawsuit were to take place, just know that I'm taking their side." "Do you want to get fired, Jane? 'Cause it sure sounds like it." "Oh, now you're threatening me? Well, I'm sorry for defending an animatronic that experienced a malfunction and is getting blamed on for a lawsuit taking place when he was forced outside in the low condition he was set in. Jane, we both know Foxy was your favorite when you were a teen. Don't start treating him like a person." "I know he's not a person, but don't blame it on an animatronic. No one will believe you." "Oh, yeah? Well, watch me win over this situation. This place rakes in money, and I'm sure as hell richer than that filthy housewife is. We're putting Foxy out of order, period. He was obsolete anyways." The mechanic narrowed her eyes as her hands clenched into fists, but she said no word as she left the room, leaving the boss with the broken animatronic to sit in silence. The next day, Pirates Cove was no longer available to the public. If you were to glance inside the room and to the stage, you'd see a sign that stood in front of it that was labeled, "Out of Order," with the curtains shut. And so, Foxy was left to sit and rust as the pizzeria focused back on Freddy's band. Eventually, kids had forgotten about Foxy's presence, and as the years grew, some arcade games were placed in front of the entrance to Pirate Cove, so it was out of sight. Even the sign about the room was taken off, and it was left to be forgotten about, both the room and of Foxy. Little did they know that Foxy lived on, behind those curtains, rusting away. And even though he had no audience during the daytime, he still had one audience member to visit him during the night. Watch out, Michael Schmidt. Foxy has just the perfect adventure in store for you.